All right, welcome back to another episode of Light Beer, Dark Money. I'm Sean Noble.
I'm Chris Clements. I'm sorry, I'm laughing.
Why are you laughing?
Well, because we have a really great guest here today who we've been pursuing for the better part of a year.
Well, she was supposed to be one of our very early guests, and she blew us off.
I know.
We got stood up.
And
That's okay.
We weren't very important.
No,
to the work that she is doing.
Darcy can get away with standing guys up.
Well, she can get away with standing us up because we've known her for so long. And we sort of have this banter, and so she just like smacked me just a second ago.
I did because I didn't realize, no one told me that this was, you guys have screens, and so I'm in my mom clothes with my mom face and my mom hair.
I'm in my workout clothes. So
well, he's always in his workout clothes. I'm actually not in plaid this week, which is
flannel.
Yeah,
no flannel plaid.
No. It's 100 degrees out.
A little warm.
Phoenix is coming back.
We're not going to see flannel for a few more months now, right?
No, it's Johnny O from now here on out. Probably not workout clothes.
Well, we have Darcy Olsen from Next Gen with us today. This is as we said,
Gen Next, right?
Next.
What is
Gen Justice?
Gen Justice. Gen Justice.
Good grief!
Will you please get it right?
I'm just happy she's here.
It's obviously a very memorable organization name. It stands for Generation Justice, because it's about the young generation.
Well,
and bringing them justice.
Darcy, you have just a remarkably interesting story. So why don't you tell us about the organization, how it came about, but then we'll get into your story as well. So.
Well, sure. Well, the organization is about 5 years old, and it is our work to protect kids who are abused. And we like to say, children can't fight their abusers, but we can. And this is something that unifies people across the nation. And what I discovered is that children who have been hurt, and these are kids who are trafficked, often by their own family members, those who are abandoned, those who are orphaned, that they have very few rights under the law, very few protections at all. I learned this when I was fostering. And with my background, I said, I can only foster so many, but I could do a lot more if we could get after some of these laws to protect these children. And that's what Gen Justice is all about.
That's awesome. So you came upon this issue because you were fostering, and then do they call it foster fail when you end up adopting? I mean, I know they do that with
you are. I'm a 4-time foster fail, which is you go into foster and you think it's temporary, and then the child needs a forever home, and so you fail at temporary because you end up adopting that child and being a permanent home. So over time, I fostered 10, and I ended up keeping 4 of those children. And it's kind of a funny story, like so many great things in your life that happen. It's the unplanned ones that really come through for you. And this was definitely not my plan, to have 4 children as a single working mom, but it's all working out.
Yeah, and you've said that this is really so much of what you were doing before really prepared you for this. Talk a little bit about that.
Yes. Well, prior to forming Gen Justice, I was working as the CEO of the Goldwater Institute. And there I was able to move a lot of public policy and really understand how changes come about, learn about that process. And I wrote a book called The Right to Try, which became a federal law. And so I was doing all of this work and learning how to change laws locally and also at the national level. And I felt inspired to become a foster mom while I was doing this, and kind of came out of the blue. So I thought, well, I'm single, so now with 4 kids, I'm probably maybe more permanent than I hope in the short term. But I went in to foster teenagers, and they said, the real need right now is for the infants, because the opioid crisis has brought a lot of infants into the system with problems, and they don't have anywhere to go. And I said, well, don't you have any 2-parent families for these little ones? And they said, we have babies overnight in government office buildings and shelters. And I couldn't think of a worse place to be. So they said, can you open a crib? And I said, without question. And the very first day I was certified, my first baby came home, and I thought she would be temporary. And it turns out that she was intended forever. And I named her Ophelia. And today she is a 10-year-old big sister to 3. And I just kept, I would pray, and just when I felt inspired, I'd open the crib again, and someone would come, and that's how I ended up with this wonderful family. And during that process, learning about the inadequacies of the system, and I just, with my background, I said, you can't have this knowledge and this passion for these children and not act on it. And so Gen Justice came about because it was the only option I had.
Yeah. And you've been, building Gen Justice over the last 5 years, you've been incredibly successful at the state legislature in terms of changing the discussion, number one, and influencing the church. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, thank you.
One of our pillars here is faith. And so there's a huge faith component to this work. And we know of several churches around this town who are now embracing this idea of, hey, in order for us to get out in the community, we need to understand the foster issue in this state. And the obstacles.
Christians in particular are called in the Bible to take care of the fatherless. And it's not a sidebar. It's a commandment. And so for some, it can be taking in those children, but that's not for everybody. But yes, and you can support families who do foster. You can give to organizations that help with those who are trafficked, which is often the children without parents. And many of the churches have really taken this calling to heart, and they talk to their congregations and they say, if you can't foster, find a way to help the people who are helping the children. And, in Arizona, for half of we basically, we have enough families to cover half the kids in foster care, and the other half we don't have enough families for. So, wow. These kids are sleeping in these shelters and congregate homes. And, if the Christian community continues in this way, there should be a home for every single child. And we can do that. And we need to do that. And we owe it to these children. And it is an act of faith. People worry that they're going to get the kid who's a fire starter, or, they worry about these genetics. But let me tell you, and as parents of biological children, hey, that's also a roll of the dice. You don't know what you're going to get.
Exactly.
And you have to have some faith that you're going to get the children that you can help, and walk it. And it will be one of the hardest things you ever do. And definitely one of the absolute best.
I'd say most rewarding, I would guess.
Beyond anything that I could have comprehended.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What? Tell us about the challenges that you have faced from both at the state and federal level on this issue, and what kind of things you have done and what still needs to be done, and how people can be a part of that.
Well, I was a little bit nervous, to tell you the truth, coming from the Goldwater Institute, which is a conservative place. And I was a little worried that when I went to the legislature that the liberal doors would close. And what I found out was that for those who were liberal, their hearts are very open, and they want to help abused children too. And I think I earned that trust because I had walked the walk, and I wasn't just talking about helping these kids. I had done it. And they could see that passion was very real. And we did what you can do in politics, which is we met with the leaders of both parties. And if there were independents, we met with them and said, what's been on your mind? And for the Democrats, they really were concerned about these kids coming into the system and relatives not being called. And for the conservatives, they were worried about children who'd never got permanent families and who were aging out, and knowing how critical it was to be surrounded by family. So really it was the same thing, right?
Yeah.
And so the first thing we went to and developed, and this passed unanimously, was we call it the relative search, and it's mandatory for the state to look for relatives in that first 30 days. And if you have an aunt, uncle, safe place to go, that's where you go. You don't take up a foster home if you've got relatives. Everybody agrees with that. And then we said, for the kids under 3, if they're in a home for 9 months and that foster family is essentially the only family they've ever known, then the child has basically the right to stay there. And then the judge can decide if someone shows up 2 or 3 years into this, whether they should go to the distant blood relative at that point or stay with the family that they've known. And that's not always an easy decision, but it is generally in the best interest of the little ones to stay where they're bonded and not have that trauma.
You have firsthand experience on that.
I have. So one of the big challenges in the system, and something that we remedied last spring, was these little ones who have been abused and trafficked and left behind. You go into court for the severance hearings with the parents who have done these things, and the parents rightly have attorneys to protect their parental rights, which is really important. And the state has attorneys to help them navigate this process, this legal process. And the only one in the courtroom without representation was the abused child. And so I was in a fortunate position that I hired private attorneys, and I spent my savings on that. For every child I had, I hired an attorney to make sure that they had due process, their rights were navigated, they could get in and out of the system. And some I was able to reunify with siblings. Some went to like a family member, and I would push very hard for that. And I said, but it's not right for it to be the roll of the dice for these kids. And rights shouldn't depend on whether your foster parent or your grandma has enough money to navigate the system. Yeah. And so we fought for a law that ended up passing unanimously that gives every single abused child an attorney to protect their rights and hopefully help them exit fast for family, whether that's biological or a new family,
Have you had a lot of attorney organizations raising their hand and say, yeah, I'm in? I mean, or has it been more difficult to?
I have truly been astonished at the goodness of people in opening their hearts to these children. There is no partisanship on this, and attorneys want to do pro bono work. Legislators want good bills to vote on. They don't always know the solutions, but if you present them, they're like, "Oh yeah, of course, the abused child who's been trafficked needs some representation." So it has really been wonderful. And we ended up influencing a federal law as well, opening up a flood of funding that was already existing, but utilizing it in a more efficient way. And it helps to put some funding into the legal work. And that's all foster care is. It's an entire system of laws, right? So you have to have a strong rule of law, and parents need their parental rights protected. We've all heard those horror stories of,
right,
the kid who goes to the mailbox or sits in the car for 5 minutes. And it's really important if the state oversteps that kid get to go back home quickly, and having an attorney helps that kid and helps the parents as well. But our focus is, at this point, is really in the gap, which tends to be the child side of the coin and their lives and protections.
Yeah, that's amazing.
How many kids are in the foster system right now in Arizona?
In Arizona, about 20,000, and nationwide, about 500,000.
Wow.
I think one of the shocking things about that I've learned, we talk a lot about trafficking in our country, and it's really become an issue, the child trafficking. And what I didn't know is that the majority of those kids who are trafficked come from the foster care system. And if you think about it, it kind of makes sense that kids who really don't have functioning parents are very vulnerable to people taking advantage of them. And sometimes it's someone's own family. And one of the things at Gen Justice, we run a pro bono legal clinic, and without revealing any personal details, but we for this child that we helped, we had a young child being trafficked for drug money by a parent, and we had another family member who figured this out and wanted to help the child but didn't have the means or didn't know how to use the system. And we were able to protect that child, get that child to safety, and then to facilitate an adoption to this really incredible family member. And that's the kind of pro bono work we do, where there are gaps, and even though sometimes children have their own attorneys, grandma may not, and she may need help rescuing her grandchildren. And we just love being able to help these little ones get their forever families. It's very gratifying to see a child who's been in hardship, and then to have what we hope for all children, which is hope and a future, and a parent that embarrasses them at school drop off.
Right.
I'm just amazed at the stories of abuse that you see come to light in the press. I read a story, it might even come from Jen Justice, I can't remember, about a perfectly normal couple who fostered a child and then kept that child like in a cage in the garage for months on end, and that child finally escaped and told the authorities. But they went through the whole system, they were verified, or whatever the system does, and yet they had it on their hearts to abuse this child, and they're basically, the defense was, well, we just can't control him, and so we felt like this is what we had to do. And I'm sure there's many, many more stories, but it's just amazing to me that this continues to go on, and your work is bringing to light a lot of this, which I think is really important.
Yes, and abuse is something that it's very challenging to present, or to prevent, excuse me, because
I'm sure to present too, because a lot of people think
it's
the
very
system
dark.
works.
It's very dark, and you find these monsters who look and appear and act very normal, and you think of the number of children who suffer these hardships like incest and molestation, and you look around you and you think, well, who in this crowd is that person?
Yeah.
Right? And so it is important, if you think that you suspect that a child is being harmed, that you call the hotline. You can call anonymously, and it's better for an investigation to occur and to prevent the death of a child or horrible abuse that can keep going than it is to falsely register that concern. And no one wants to be falsely accused, but lives can be on the line. So if you feel in your gut, or you're seeing something, it's better to call and let the police do their work. And if they're not going to remove a child that they're not certain is in very, very serious danger. The federal law says we keep children at home unless it is so dangerous and severe that their lives are on the line, and only then do we remove a child. So if they're removing a child, there's something very grave happening.
Yeah.
You've obviously built an organization from nothing over the last 5 years. What is the goal for, tell us a little bit about milestones that you've hit, and then what do you see looking forward, and what's your vision?
Well, the vision is that the system work as it's intended, which is a temporary safety net that gets children into safety and very quickly to family, whether that's a biological family member, whether they can go home or not, or whether they need a new family. And that is the ultimate goal. And so we have a bill going right now that basically says you cannot continue these cases unless it is an absolute emergency, because for a child, time is everything. And not a single state, including Arizona, is in compliance with federal law that says within 12 to 15 months, you need an answer for that child. They deserve that. And so the Arizona legislature just unanimously voted on this law, and we're confident the governor will sign it so that their cases are expedited as they should be. So we want things like that. For the kids who end up aging out of the system, that is a very rough place to be with no family, probably not a great education, and a lot of trauma from terrible things that have happened. So in our law clinic, we're providing those kids with navigation services so we can help them find somewhere to live. They can get their high school credits, or maybe they're trying to go on to college, and we can help them figure out, there are a lot of programs and a lot of supports out there, but a kid with no cell phone and nowhere to go is not going to access that, right? So someone's got to facilitate that. So we want to do that. It's never too late for a family. I heard about a 30-year-old who got adopted, and she wanted that closure. She wanted it to be official. So, if you're out there and maybe you're you think you're a retired parent, take in one of those teenagers who has 6 months to go and adopt them into your family, and they can have your church or your neighbors or your family. And is it the same? No, but is it a family? Yes. And that gives them hope and somewhere to fall back. So just encourage people to really think through any way that they can possibly help, and to not think about what you don't bring to the table. Like, I couldn't think about they don't have a dad. I had to think about the inspiration I had, which is, a good mom, and hopefully hopefully I work to be a great mom, is better than no mom, right? Better than no parent. So don't think you're too old, or you don't have enough money, or you're not going to have enough time. Like, you got love and you're ready to help. Trust that you can do that.
Well, and I think I can't, I think about, as kids age out of the system, like, well, it's too late. But nobody, even as we get much older, doesn't need to have some kind of family support. If you're 40, if you're 50, whatever. So just saying, oh, well, they're 18, so now they're adults and they're in society and they're on their own. That's not a good situation. So they need that, even if it is right before they age out. I think that's a great point, that getting a family for them to turn to, because, they've had a rough life up to that point, and it's probably going to be pretty rough at times going forward.
Yeah, you think about these good teens who have to come home and figure out how to do laundry, and they can't get car insurance, they can't afford a car, and even if you're scholarship to college, you've got a gap for books and clothing, and just the love, just having one cheerleader in your corner to say, you know what, you are special, and in the case of those of faith, you're a daughter or son of God like anybody else, and just because you've been through these things, you are no less than anyone, and you can achieve whatever you set your heart and mind to. And I agree, whether that's at 2 years old or 18 years old. And I became godmother to a young man who had went into the system when he was 3, and they took so long to put him through the system. It took about 5 years for severance. By the time he was 8, he was considered basically unadoptable. That's what happens in the system. They sort of deem you that. So when I met him at 17, he only had a couple high school credits, and it turned out that he had a pro bono attorney who adopted him at the very last minute. And this kid, who had been on a bunch of medicines, who everybody had written off, with his 6 high school credits and all these behaviors that came out of anger, went into the Army, has been serving our country for 3 years, and has done so well that at times he's been the only one promoted. And that is what love can do, and just not giving up. And I truly believe that no child or young adult is without hope.
Yeah. That's
one thing that you've brought up a couple times I find remarkable is that the legislation that your organization has pursued has passed unanimously. That's not an easy task with the legislature that we have here in Arizona.
no question.
And you must have had to change a lot of people's hearts and perceptions of you as a leader coming from the Goldwater Institute, and people on the left have their own views of that. But talk a little bit about those discussions, because I'm always fascinated by that. We talk about bipartisanship. We talk about certain issues that we want to be bipartisan. But you've proven by force of will and and probably through some personality that a lot of these issues can be bridged, because a unanimous vote on anything, especially something as dramatic as this that's going to change children's lives, that everyone can agree upon is proper public policy, is a complete rarity.
Well, I think it speaks to the goodness and openness of hearts. And how I went in personally, I think if you just have to kind of acknowledge your differences and say, I'm walking in this room and you may have these ideas about me, and I hope you can just set them aside for 5 minutes, and I can tell you some stories about why I'm here and why I'm trying to help these kids, and that we can find agreement. And I have found people very, very receptive to the acknowledgement that we have political differences. But in this case, people love children. It's, it's in our natures, and that's everybody. And so I feel like if people give you just a minute to convey the depth and breadth of this problem and to put concrete solutions on the table, it's just it requires really no effort after that. It's really just being open and doing that introduction. And another thing that we were able to change that people just said, we didn't know that was going on. So about half of the kids in foster care have special ed needs. Sometimes it's a function of birth, but often it's because they haven't been in school and they've been moved, and they have all these challenges. Well, we found out a majority, they weren't getting their special ed services, and it's because to usher in special education, you need a parent's signature. By definition, they kind of had inactive or unavailable parents. So we went to the legislature and said, hey, what if we keep the parental rights intact, and a parent could affirmatively come in and say, no special ed, or yes, special ed, but if they're not available and we can't reach them, could the foster parent or relative or DCS usher in those services? And they were like, well, that's common sense. These kids need help. And again, unanimous. And just all it was is identifying the problem, bringing the solution, and helped all these kids. And what's been really neat is, look, resources are limited and we have to raise all of our funds. And so the model we have is to really be, if we can, a model, and kind of be a light for people to look at. And so other states, Georgia, Louisiana, Florida, North Carolina, we have bills now in Ohio and a few other states, and they can copycat, and we share as widely and freely as we can, and we just see this stuff being picked up, and it is wonderful, and that momentum can't come a minute too soon.
Well, that's what I was just thinking about, is that you had to, for how many years has this not been the case? That's crazy when you think about it. Is there a similar organization, or are there similar organizations in other states, or are you kind of filling a gap, not just here in Arizona, but across the country?
I wish, and we have looked for other organizations that are reform-oriented and that really are trying to look at the child side of things, but we really aren't finding any. What we see is something else that's needed. We see a lot of service places, people trying to give homes, making sure that these kids have mattresses and clothes and things like that, but which is wonderful and helps in a temporary fashion. But our goal is to get them families and to get them justice and make sure that in the legal system that they are protected by the laws that protect all of our freedoms, and that deeper, sort of heavier lift is unique to Gen Justice, and is the reason I believe that these ideas are taking hold so quickly. Because back when we were kids, it's the same stories that we heard then, we hear now, and people have been wanting solutions and wanting to help. So our dedication to researching these issues and putting solutions on the table, people are thirsty for that. And, I, like you, sort of thought it would take 10 years to get kids attorneys. And the very year we introduced the idea, it was unanimous.
Deal. Yeah. I don't think people really understand, hopefully our listeners understand how dramatic that is to get kids attorneys to represent them in court.
Yes, here
and the fact that it's not being replicated in every state, and there's a calling there, obviously, a dramatic one, to make sure that happens.
It's just it was a blessing that I had the background from the Goldwater Institute, and that I happened to be in court with all of these wonderful foster children, and even though it was, you'd see it and it would hurt, and you saw this absence, what it enabled me to do was to be in, to think, I was like, well, I know what this kid needs, and I know if the law changed this way, it would make it better. And so to put two and two together, and definitely an act of faith to start an organization with, at the time, 4 under 4 at my kitchen table, and leaving a really great career, and just coming off a book tour and all of that. But I knew in my heart there was no other direction, and I really...
But you were kind of walking into that for a while, I think. I saw it just because of our friendship and my involvement with Goldwater. You were speaking more and more about the needs of children on a public stage. And I'm going to embarrass you a little bit. You put Goldwater on the map. Before Darcy Olsen, the Goldwater Institute was nothing in the state and nothing nationally. It was just this thing. And because of the things that you pursued, you put Goldwater on the map. And then, but then you were starting to lean in to a lot of child welfare issues, and we saw it. I saw it, and so this was the perfect next step for you. It seemed.
It was. I feel like it was meant to be, and I appreciate your kind words about my leadership at the Goldwater Institute. And I like to say that I'm a good coach. I'm good at fielding a team, and there's so many good people doing so much good work, and the same with Gen Justice. I've just found these wonderful people who have come to us. Most of the leaders there have fostered children or adopted children, and they also have biological children, and they have these experiences that really inform. And just if you're the person who adopted the 17-year-old, boy, you feel that, and then you think, I was able to help the one, but what about the 10,000?
Yeah.
And I remember, I say this, for all of us have sibling rivalries, and my older brother would say, you're doing great, but you're not going to bring them all home, and you're not going to be able to help them all. And I was like, oh, you are so wrong. So
You can't
I
help
have
them
that
all.
satisfaction now of knowing that we're able to impact kids from coast to coast and make it just a little bit better.
Well, and that was my next question: is that how did you find this great team to just join you in this vision? Because I've gotten to know a couple of them over the years, and they're phenomenal. And
I feel it just. I don't want to overplay my faith card here, but I gotta say it was like it.
we can talk about faith all day long.
It was like meant to be. So the vice president, I moved into this neighborhood. It turned out was my neighbor, pro bono attorney. We get to know each other. She's got adopted kids and all these skills. And so from the ground, I was telling her I was go over there and say, I'm going to do this thing. And she's like, oh, I love that thing. And then, so she's on board from the ground. And then Tim Keller, who was at the Institute for Justice, was an old friend. And I went to get some advice from him before I even filed the C3 paperwork. And he said, I love this idea. And did you know that my wife, Lisa, and I are foster parents? And I was like, you got to be kidding me. And so took a couple years we had to raise money, but able to bring him over. And then it just kept going from there. And we've got an attorney right now who was in foster care until she was 7. And she brings a very unique perspective when she argues in court to those judges and says, I know what these delays mean for children. And so just the right people keep finding us. And we just hired a really terrific analyst who's going to help solve some of the deep problems. And he and his wife, they had a second cousin who had a baby that couldn't be kept, and they stepped in. So that was a kinship adoption. And so we've just seen it in so many ways. But I do want to say one of the things we're going after is half of the children who die of abuse every year have either open cases with child protection or went through child protection. So It's a complete failure of the state to protect these lives. And we have to get after that. So you may not know abuse is occurring, but I'll be darned if you do know and you have an open case, then we need those kids protected, and we have to figure out why half of them basically go home and suffer death at the hands of the very people who are supposed to love them. So that is not an easy thing to do, but that's our mission at Gen Justice, to protect these young lives.
It's amazing.
Well, and it's not a liberal issue. It's not a conservative issue. I was just thinking it's a Jesus issue, because that's what he called us to do.
Yes, and I mean, if you happen to be, an atheist, as we all have in our families, you know, I've heard him say, look, you get one go round, let's make it right for these kids. So, it's almost, I feel like no matter where people are coming from, that this is just the unifying issue. And when we know we can make a difference, then we need to make the difference.
Yeah.
We are the difference.
Yeah, no question. So obviously you're a 501c3, which means that you rely on the generosity of folks. How can people get involved, coming up on tax time? So in Arizona, there's a unique opportunity for people to support you and get a tax credit.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. So Arizona, we're on the vanguard of so much here. We're the only state in the country where if you donate to a charity like ours that helps foster kids, you can get a tax credit up to $1,000. So it either is going to go to state government to fund heaven knows what, or you can give it to a place like Gen Justice, and you know that you are helping kids in our pro bono clinic, and you are moving reforms at the legislature. So people have been very generous to us that way, and that's how it's part of, it's a regular funding source for us. And like I said, we make the difference. And when you start an organization from scratch and you don't have a penny, you see every name that comes in and every dollar. And, we get these checks, these envelopes, and it's like, it's coming from your grandma, and it's, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a $5 bill, or those who have big means, sometimes they do those really big checks. But if you can take advantage of the credit and you want to help these kids, it all adds up. It's an old expression, but every penny counts. And, we would love to have people look at genjustice.org and see what they think, and join us in this work to protect this generation, and not just this one, but the generations to come.
Yeah. Well, I can't thank you enough for the work that you're doing. Because you think about not only are you saving the lives of kids who are abused, but, we need smart kids to grow up in stable homes to keep, our progress going as humans and in this country and in this world. And you just think about some of the greatest minds that we've had have come from broken families, and somehow they had they got out of it. They had a chance. So there are some, maybe there's a kid that's going to cure cancer that needs to get out of the system and into a loving home. I mean, it's just, there's so much potential there that we need to tap into.
Well, and, people like to say Jesus was adopted, and as was Moses. It's all throughout our history, and you go to the modern day, Steve Jobs was adopted, Faith Hill was adopted. I mean, and you can't see adoption, so you don't know unless you ask someone. And every life has tremendous potential. And I think now of my one I want to identify, but one of my children, and came from a family that had multiple children and drug problems that they couldn't keep, but that mother had also been in the system, right? So it's generational. And I look at this beautiful child I have now, kind to the siblings, and we have an elderly neighbor, making cards for the neighbor and bringing over Thanksgiving meals. And I look at her and I think, you just broke the cycle. And she wants to take over Gen Justice one day, and whatever she does, she's going to bring great joy into the world, and that is it is precious. It is precious to see the change in that life, to know what would have been, and now what will be. And I am not a miracle parent. I just have a lot of love, and all of these children, regardless of drug exposure or whatever it is that they've been through, I truly believe if we wrap ourselves around them and we do have some faith, and they can become anything.
Yeah.
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 Absolutely. Give
That's
them hope.
fantastic. Well, thank you, Darcy, for being here. We will definitely have you back sometime.
Thanks for the opportunity.
We always
Yes,
say we're going to have people back, but
I do.
but we've had a nice string of
We've got-
guests where
yeah,
we've
we-
had one person back.
We've had one repeat.
Yeah.
But I mean, we need to get regular updates because this is one that's super important.
Yeah,
I think the
absolutely.
more that people hear about it, the more that they can help you.
Well, we would love that. And I so appreciate your time and your audience. And I hope, maybe one person out there today was inspired to open up their home or to become more active in supporting these children in any way at all. And if so, then our work today has been a great success.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks everybody for listening.
Yeah,
And
thanks for being
again,
here,
Darcy.
and God bless you.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody.
Bye.